Words from a book showed me the way to be free of the shadows of yesterday. And the price of that freedom we all must pay from now on. Will take us from here to eternity, to a future we thought could never be. We stand tall, joining together we held our ground, and we lifted our voices one mighty sound. We struck down the walls of darkness, we stood tall. We decided to take a stand to defend the rights of man. And we stand tall. No turning back. We found the way. Forever we live on. And we stand tall. Entering into this golden age, we have taken our place on the global stage. Scientology's changed forever, everywhere. We now have a trust to forward on, to continue the work that was begun, and widen the path that we have won. We stand tall. So your legacy is secure. We have kept your vision beyond, and we stand tall. No turning back. We found a way.
2007, the year the world of Scientology changed forever. And if that change was embodied in the phrase, bringing source to the world, it all began as we rang in the new year with the release of an introduction to Scientology, LRH's only filmed interview, digitally restored and in 50 languages, to welcome a planet to the bridge to eternity. While in full reflection of just how wide we are broadening that bridge, it was the grand opening of our new ideal org in the capital of the English-speaking world. And then again, in what once stood as the symbol of world suppression, there now stands a new symbol of liberty and freedom, as told to more than 100 nations, from the International Herald Tribune and BBC to USA Today and CNN International. And all of it was but a glimpse of what we were about to unleash as the next 12 months unfolded, beginning at Ron's birthday celebration. First, with a source briefing illuminating the very beginnings and evolution of Dianetics to Scientology, in the words of those who were there. From Book One and the first auditors at the original Dianetics Foundation, to Wichita, Kansas, and the discovery of past lives. And from the legendary Philadelphia doctorate course and the announcement of Operating Phaeton, to Phoenix, Arizona, and the route to exteriorization, culminating in the birth of our religion and the first Church of Scientology. Whereupon, and in representation of what LRH most wished for on his birthday, it was a pan-global rollout of new churches, all in the name of ideal orgs. From the heartland of America, in St. Louis, the original gateway to the West, and tomorrow's gateway to the bridge. In Chicago, the Windy City, where it's now a tornado in the making for widespread clearing. In Kansas City, at the literal heart of the USA, and where our new org will soon be center of it all. Then again, north of the border in Winnipeg, in the heartland of the great Canadian Prairie. And south of the border, with a Bogota org to bring a new purpose to the people of Colombia. Then spanning the globe to its most distant points, another in South Africa, with a landmark building in the friendly city of Port Elizabeth. While down under in New Zealand, with a national church like no other in Auckland. And finally, with expansion the British Empire hasn't experienced in centuries, in the industrial city of Manchester, with an org that will exemplify what the everyday working man deserves. While for England's northeast, it was yet another for Newcastle and Sunderland, drawn right from the pages of Alice in Wonderland. And if the operating word was expansion, it truly was happening everywhere, as evidenced by our world champion missions and orgs. Yet if our new breed of ideal orgs are meant to be living embodiments of the technology itself, the essence of that technology took on a whole new dimension at our OT Summit 2007. It began quite literally with an OT view, graduating no less than 21 new OT8s on opening night. Whereupon we previewed our future advance to a new civilization at last, with a mecca in the name of personal immortality, and the delivery of LRH calls resurgence and superpower rundowns for planetary clearing. And then, all the way to the pinnacle of the bridge, with a Free Winds briefing culminating in our future destination at the highest levels of OT, at new OT 9, 10, and beyond. Then again, if the year had already seen an unrelenting rollout of ideal orgs in the name of bringing every being to the heights of OT, it took on IAS dimensions for global influence at the epicenter of world hotspots. From the flashpoint of African conflict, with a statement in Zimbabwe to forever change the course of the Dark Continent, to the boiling point of religious conflict, soon to be home to our new org in Tel Aviv. And from bringing our help directly to those who set the cultural trends in Harlem, New York. Then again, with a sister org at the cultural crossroads of the West Coast in Inglewood, California. But if all of it was in the name of the future, nothing so tipped the scales in the here and now as the monumental announcement of the greatest recovery of lost tech in history. Here was the answer to total conceptual understanding of the very foundation upon which all Dianetics and Scientology rests, the basics, marking the dawn of a golden age of knowledge for eternity. So it rolled out LOH books in their pure form, exactly as he intended for the first time ever. His lectures, never before available, amplifying every milestone discovery and its application in auditing and life. And all of it in 15 languages, so making available the universal revelations to nearly half the world's population, while setting in motion the greatest boom in our history. But if all of it was universe-shattering in terms of first dynamic personal freedom, changing the world of Scientology forever, so too would the world itself change forever. That was the rallying call as we assembled all forces at the IAS anniversary, reshaping the destiny of Earth on the fourth dynamic. First, with full-track suppressors enjoying their worst year in history in the name of obliteration, we next torqued it up by dropping the motherlode in the name of global vaporization. Then, to uplift populations freed from the source of suppression, strategic campaigns and programs to no less than audit a planet. Operation Drug-Free Earth, the largest planetary campaign of its kind, now having reached 500 million, and rolling out in 2008 to another billion. Operation Planetary Calm, with the way to happiness into the hands of every major government and business on Earth. And now, moving into the very infrastructure of society itself, making human rights a global reality, with a groundswell movement that is reaching right into the United Nations and, in turn, outwards in 2008 to unite every nation. And finally, bringing our volunteer minister help everywhere, from the world's most prominent cities to the farthest and least accessible corners of Earth. And now into the next dimension with the launch of a global virtual cavalcade to reach everyone with a message that something can be done about it. But if all of it underscored what it means to say we are the IAS, nothing said it more than our final statement in the name of Ideal Orgs for Planetary Impact. For it's where all roads lead, the very center of Western civilization, and our new IAS-sponsored Ideal Org for Rome. At which point, and with all else in place, we hit the switch. For with orgs rising across every land of Earth, with our influence greater than ever, so came the launch of the golden age of knowledge in the public phase. And as for what reverberated from there, it was no less than the dawn of a global renaissance to bring in a new year for all the ages. So, welcome to Los Angeles, California, home to Church of Scientology International, Celebrity Center International, the Pacifica Bridge, and the greatest concentration of Scientologists on Earth. Join us now at the Shrine Auditorium, for this is the Scientology New Year's Celebration 2008.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. And yes, you've arrived at a night of unadulterated celebration. It's also a night of full conceptual understanding of that phrase, Happy New Year, and all their joyous traditions therein. Then again, it's a night that returns us to the whole idea of flipping a calendar page with a flourish. Because if ever we did a calendar right, it was the last 365 days of 2007. As a matter of fact, you might even call it a turning point. Better yet, a tipping point, when agreed upon reality in our world begins to alter reality out there. Whereupon we come to the source point of a legend, which holds that a peal of bells at the stroke of midnight will ring in a new year wherein everything is suddenly and miraculously better. And if such seems incredible, inconceivable, and otherwise contrary to known physical universe laws, then I give you the universe of Scientology, where seeing is believing. Since you first heard it said, we aren't just in the news, we are the news, word of it has doubled and doubled again, until on the average, anywhere on Earth, it'll only take you 11 seconds to see or hear of Scientology. And given those who glimpse it inevitably want to know more than 41 million either clicked on or called us through the last 12 months alone. And it goes without saying they got what they wanted and then some, because we brought on answers through 1,300 frontline groups delivering LRH social betterment tech in 143 nations, and we did so on behalf of more than 7 million. And just as people latch onto our solutions for social betterment, so they won our campaigns for a better world. In point of fact, it's now 13,482 government agencies and community groups on board with our Fourth Dynamic Salvage campaigns, and that's not including the United Nations funneling our programs everywhere else. And any other way you want to measure it, those campaigns reached no less than 188 million, and that's likewise through this calendar year 2007. As the last 12 months also saw a volunteer minister rollout like never in history, we further reached them by the millions, one-on-one and face-to-face. While through the process, the growth rate of our VM force is 80 times greater than any other volunteer organization in America. And lest anyone doubt their dedication, it just so happens national averages for volunteer help ran 50 hours a year, while our guys averaged more than 200 hours through the last 12 months. And when you couple it with all others providing the multitudes with effective help, including those from ABLE, WISE, and our whole array of frontline auditors and missions, that's what made 2007 the year wherein the number of those introduced to LRH Tech would fill Dodger Stadium every single day. But if you really want the grandstand view of 2007, you've also got to figure this. Since releasing the basics last June, readers digested 434,772,392 pages worldwide, although I might be off by a decimal point or so, as they're now moving through better than 2,000 pages a minute to complete 1,610,000 books since July. They're also listening to basic lectures every minute. No, make that a lecture every 1.4 seconds, although for full conceptual understanding of that one, since the basics release, it's now more than 12.9 million lectures playing in every imaginable land, including mainland China, North Korea, and Iran. But the real lesson for 2007 is not about geography, it's about altitude, as in what the basics signal as regards an impending boom up the bridge, while for the merest glimpse of it, speed through pro metering has doubled, speed through pro TRs has tripled, and speed through academy levels has likewise tripled, save for the ones who travel even faster. Although for the final track time in this golden age of knowledge, you've got to hit a stopwatch in our HGCs, because that's where it's new releases, clears, and OTs every 20 minutes, while in the jet wash of that now stands new OT8s in 35 nations and as far afield as Colombia, Greece, and Afghanistan. But for the whole geographic spread, you've got to factor in our ideal orgs now standing at 3,266,000 square feet. And if you can't quite conceive of where that will take us, then lay out that square footage as a highway, and it would literally stretch through the stratosphere. And if you still can't quite conceive where we're going tonight, then take a look at the signpost up ahead, because there stands Scientology, population 7,731 groups, missions, and orgs across 164 nations. And if you didn't catch what else is posted at the border, all you've got to know is that we've just returned to home universe, and this is your official welcome to the International Scientology New Year Celebration 2008. Now, as is customary this evening, we'll take a time-honored tour of the sectors where our social salvage programs are indeed altering perceptions of reality. In particular, that it's all but impossible to consistently crack heavy drug habits, which of course Narconon proves otherwise every day. That you'll never significantly rehab hardcore prison populations, which Criminon likewise disproves. That any meaningful educational reform is going to cost you billions, which Applied Scholastics just as routinely disproves, and that the very nature of economics is a lesson in uncertainty, which is what wise belies. We'll also tour the realms of our field auditors and missions, where the whole stock in trade is new states of reality. But for the first word on what amounts to metaphysical changes out there, as occasioned by changes in our world, well, it rightfully belongs to our ideal orgs. Because, and let's make no mistake, take everything we're doing across all sectors of Scientology, and here is the centerpiece of it all. Or to put it another way, the creation of ideal orgs isn't just another strategy to create beautiful buildings. No, it is the way in which we build organizations embodying every word of LRH tech and policy, and which become the emanation point of every bit of that tech to their respective geographic zones. Ideal orgs presently define who we are in 13 metropolitan zones, and as you saw rolling across the screens during our introductory video, that number is going to be expanding dramatically. Indeed, there are 60 more in the pipeline with buildings already in hand, all while we are pressing the accelerator to the max to complete every org by the turn of the decade. But if you think you've already seen an impressive rollout, then let's return to that metaphysical, indeed magical analogy with which I began. In other words, putting aside all else one of these orgs provides in terms of personal salvation and freedom, what about the seemingly intangible? Or to put it another way, even beyond the sum of its parts, what does one of these orgs mean in terms of spheres of influence, global influence? In other words, what's that X factor when it comes to the environment itself? And in answer to that question, it's now the fact that our world becomes the agreed upon reality. So, if you've already seen the rollout of new ideal orgs in the making for 2007, let's put the exclamation point on it now. For example, Johannesburg, South Africa. It's one of our oldest orgs, and indeed, it was in Joburg that LRH originally developed and or refined most of our introductory services, personnel efficiency, anatomy of the human mind, to name a few. But more to the point of tonight is both their status as a religion and application for tax exemption originally applied for in 1965. Of course, with our stance on the then government policy of apartheid, the powers that be were hardly going to recognize us. But even afterwards, following the fall of that racist regime, application after application was still declined. South Africa remained inflexible as to what it regarded as a sanctioned religion, which pretty much included nothing founded after the 1st century AD. But then to Joburg came our ideal org and this. The first fully integrated religious community, now replete with native African golden age of tech class 5s for delivery into Zulu and Swahili territories. The first cross-cultural religious movement with volunteer ministers in Daveyton, Soweto, and even out of Mozambique. The first all-inclusive human rights initiative with our public service announcements on both All African Television and South African National Broadcasting. And if that's not even the half of it, all that matters at the moment is this. 42 years since first request, 26 applications and denials, then an ideal org, and on the 28th of November 2007, the Church of Scientology received full religious recognition and tax exemption for all of South Africa. Next example, the United Kingdom and our new London org opened last year. And in this instance, it concerns a government which has just done something to accelerate our creation of even more British ideal orgs. The backstory in brief is this. For better than 25 years, our UK churches were subjected to what's called a value-added tax, otherwise known as VAT. It's basically a sales tax that's leveled on all commercial goods and services, as well as certain churches of which Her Majesty's government does not approve, and which in the main means churches that don't conform to Henry VIII's idea of a church. Nevertheless, as of October 2000, we too received an exemption from VAT. It was not, however, retroactive, meaning that taxes paid prior to that year 2000 exemption were not refundable, which in effect meant we were only a religion because Her Majesty's government conceded so, and we weren't a religion before they said so. But then to England came our ideal org in London, and since our orgs are meant to emanate every facet of LRH tech, let's put this one under the heading of ethics. You see, even if we knew full well a refund for prior years was rightfully owed, the sum wasn't that great, a few million for the entire period prior to the year 2000. But if it was rightfully owed, then our view was the UK government should rightfully pay interest for the full 20 years they withheld our funds. So the question came down to this. In exempting one from VAT payments, the government must decide if the money will better service the public good if used by the government, or if it is better used by the entity which is seeking exemption, in this case, the Church of Scientology. And the answer was resounding, because as of this December 2007, we're not only fully exempt from all value-added taxes, Her Majesty's government will now return every English penny in past taxes, more than 20 years of it, and all with interest to boot, and yes, that's the UK government coming on board for an entire continent of ideal orgs in 2008. Next example, Spain. And I'll tell you at the outset that this is one of our most significant victories in history, and for more reasons than one. To begin, Spain was site of our most protracted European battle. Indeed, it was just 20 years ago that their fascist regime government not only raided our churches, but jailed several individuals for some months until we forced their release. Not stopping there, and despite the lack of any evidence of any wrongdoing, they brought the matter to trial. In fact, the battle raged on for more than a decade, whereupon we were entirely vindicated, emerging victorious in 2001. For all intents and purposes, that should have ended the matter. But if the fascist government that initiated these attacks had since been overthrown, a new power emerged: the Catholic Church. Now, lest one forget, Europe was not founded on the principle of freedom of religion, and no nation less so than Spain. In fact, you may have heard of something called the Spanish Inquisition. Nevertheless, we move forward with the establishment of yet another ideal org, our National Church of Scientology of Spain, located in Madrid and opened in 2004. Immediately thereafter, we applied newly for religious recognition. However, many other factors were at work. You see, Spain has a unique religious registration process, one used by several other European nations. Moreover, the European Union requires that all membership nations treat any given religion in the same fashion. Namely, if a religion is recognized in one European Union country, such as Spain, it must be treated the same in all other member nations. Hence, as we now know, our application was of more than a little concern in nations such as France and Germany, if only to name specifically the guilty. Then too, the Spanish government has a very unique review process on any application, wherein a panel comprised of representatives of recognized religions reviews any new applications and vote on their approval. In this case, that review panel was comprised of a Catholic, and a few more Catholics. As for their vested interest, consider this. In Spain, the Catholic Church is subsidized by the government. Specifically, any taxpayer can denote the Catholic Church as their religion, and the government then forwards a portion of that individual's taxes to the church. But so in decline were those denominations, meaning the number of taxpayers checking off the box, giving the church a portion of their taxes. Well, the Spanish government was having to forward more money than the Catholics were owed, or they wouldn't even meet their weekly FP. Finally, combine it all with the fact we just opened our church with attendance figures that filled 2 city blocks, very much in front of Spanish Parliament just down the street, and which also replayed in full on national TV. The point? When you are losing money, the last thing you want is anybody that could be viewed as competition. Result, the Religious Affairs Department denied our application in 2005. So we took it to court and included within our filing everything that comprises an ideal org, and all of it in a visual presentation of our new Madrid church. All of which brings us to today. On the one side, prejudicial and discriminatory governments of several European nations with everything to lose should we be recognized. And on the other side, our ideal org and everything we stand for. And I wouldn't be mentioning it if you didn't already know where this was headed, with a unanimous decision by the Spanish National Court and our National Church of Spain now fully recognized, and on the 13th of December entered into the Spanish registry as a religious organization, and that's our ideal org in Madrid on this New Year's 2008. But if those are 3 monumental victories in the wake of ideal orgs, there's something else in the name of the future. Specifically, what's the battle plan when you have governments so oppressive they even prevent the establishment of an ideal org and the safe ground which then follows for all else? For example, places like Russia. Now, the story in this one takes us all the way back to the Soviet collapse and the first above-board Dianetics delivery to people who'd previously heard only whispers of it. The result? A boom reminiscent of Book 1 in 1950, with groups and missions dotting the landscape from Moscow to Siberia. But if you follow the international news, you are no doubt familiar with the changing tide in Russia. The Iron Curtain had come down, exposing the disgraceful state of a nation so long under the suppression of communism. And while at first they welcomed anything Western with open arms, other vested interests were also at work. In this instance, the original villain of the piece being the Russian Orthodox Church, which had long been in cahoots with the old Soviet regime, and which kind of liked the idea they were the only state-authorized religion. So bringing their considerable clout to bear on what passes for a Russian justice system, the old Orthodox Church kept out all comers, specifically working to enact a law that only churches which had been established for so many years could be registered. Of course, it only included churches in Russia before the fall of the Iron Curtain. In point of fact, between 1998 and 2005, our Moscow church applied for registration as a religious organization 11 times to no avail. We also filed 7 court cases, likewise to no avail. At which point, and against all odds, we took the matter to the European Court of Human Rights. To understand their stature as a European court, compare it to the United States Supreme Court. Now consider that every nation in Europe has something equivalent to the U.S. Supreme Court. But now further consider a Supreme Court of all Supreme Courts of all European Union nations. That's the European Court of Human Rights. It's literally the place of last resort, and they only take cases that bear upon the whole woof and warp of Europe. As a matter of fact, they've never accepted more than 0.04% of all cases filed, which adds all the more weight to this. And once again, it was a unanimous decision issued on the 29th of November 2007 with the European Court ordering the Church of Scientology to be registered and afforded the same rights as every other religion, and now that's the land across all of Europe as of this New Year's 2008. Yet if that's the state of Scientology from the perspective of ideal orgs and monumental victories sweeping the road of obstacles to planetary clearing, there yet remains an even greater victory of 2007 in terms of accomplishing that goal. In that regard, it's your classic last but by no means least. It's also the very epitome of a milestone, a watershed, a benchmark, and a landmark. Because for all this year represented, what 2007 will always be remembered for, and indeed why this year will always be remembered, can be said in 2 words: the basics. Needless to say, the subject needs no further introduction, and it's undoubtedly enough to say, not only do the basics represent the greatest recovery of lost tech in history, rather, what they represent is the recovery of Dianetics and Scientology, period. As for this New Year's event and our end-of-the-year review of expansion, well, here too the story is unprecedented. Never in history have so many availed themselves of the tech, be it across Australia and New Zealand, where it's quadruple anything in history, be it at our ideal org at Joburg, where the numbers of those on courses swell 10 times and more, be it in England at St. Hill, or our ideal org in London, where grade chart completions also doubled in the wake of basics, be it all over Europe, whether in Madrid, Berlin, or Milano, and yes, it's the same all over Latin America, where they all but doubled courseroom space with truckloads of tables and chairs, and still there was more across the East US. New York was yet another that doubled courseroom space overnight, while everywhere up and down the eastern seaboard it was tripling, quadrupling, even 5 timesing of courseroom capacities. And while, of course, it's the same again across the West U.S., and all you need to know is the Pacifica Bridge, where it's thousands at a time, all the time, until at last you come to Flag, where they've long since filled all massive courtrooms and even the grand ballroom better than 1,200 students through any 12-hour stretch. So yes, I could go on and tell you that whole vast story. Because if our New Year's event is about expansion, then what we're experiencing as of tonight isn't just unprecedented, it's literally right off the graph, as in, and specifically, expansion 10 times since July, literally. But that's not what really matters. On the contrary, what matters is everything these basics represent in terms of eternity for every Scientologist. So, if it is already an unprecedented boom, then let there be no doubt it's just the beginning. As we stated this past summer, the world of Scientology would change forever. And yes, it has. Because let there be no mistake, no matter what the future up the line may hold, the foundation of that future is in the here and now with the basics. Yes, in terms of training. Yes, in terms of processing, all the way to the highest levels. In terms of gains in the here and now, consider these figures. Take all students planet-wide, and it's an average increase of 6.8 IQ after each and every book and lecture series. And then again, upon completion of the basics and with no other training or processing, average OCA increases of 222 points. As for what it further represents, students on Academy are now moving through books 4 times previous speed, not to mention they understand what they are studying. And as for auditing, speed through NED to case completion or clear, double, and speed through OT levels, double again. But even those results are still but a shadow of a description of what the basics have brought. Why? Because when talking about the basics, there is no description. They are the basics, they are Dianetics and Scientology. We've never had them before, pure unadulterated LRH discoveries as he intended them to be. And now we do. And the only way to grasp the full magnitude of what it means is by experiencing it yourself. So while I could reiterate everything encompassed in bringing on these new materials and what it all means as regards Dianetics and Scientology, well, you've already had that briefing. Which brings us to tonight, where all that matters is your study, your realizations, your knowledge. And since you've already heard it from me, let's instead hear it from you. If you are one of the few who haven't begun your journey, then listen up. And for all the rest, here are your fellow adventurers who now know at least 2 things. No, they are not stupid. And my God, this is it.
Everybody has to do it, and it won't sink in until you really sit down and you really read and you really get the data. That's when you're really going to know, okay, what all this is about, this new golden age of knowledge, you know. It's got a whole new meaning.
There isn't one single thing that you will not get. The datums literally like stick out in the page, like you just, boom.
I feel like a tree of knowledge of Scientology and Dianetics, and that the basics are these roots. My roots are going down into the center of the earth.
I had a pretty good understanding of Dianetics before, I thought. And now having read the book and done the lectures, it's now a brand new subject to me, honestly. I mean, honestly, it is a brand new subject.
And when you read it again, you go, oh my God, he knew this in May of 1950.
And it just stood out like this elephant in the middle of the room when I'm going, I can't have an MU on that.
And that's after like 21 years in Scientology. I was like, oh, okay.
But when you read it in chronological sequence and you have it there like that, you're just like, bam, it's just like right there.
You have a platform to stand on. You have truth and you have what's right.
The glossaries in the back. Oh, man. Everybody talks about the glossaries. Well, it's all true.
When I look in the glossary, boom, there it is, you know.
Any MUs? Everything's on the glossary. Why do you even think about having dictionaries?
Don't get into word chains. Never get into word chains.
You get all the significances that he was talking about at the time
relative to things you never knew you never knew.
And you know it so much to your core that it's just bam, bam, bam.
So necessarily you go faster. There's actually no way to avoid it. I don't think you can slow down if you try. But after you get through the book, and you're kind of sitting there going, wow, I've got all this incredible data. And then you listen to the lectures, and the lectures just knock it out of the park.
If you had a little inkling of an understanding before and a little better understanding after you read the books, you have a complete infinitive understanding after you hear the lectures.
And you are hands down unstoppable in your use of the technology.
Every time I would start a new lecture set, like, I didn't have like a hidden standard like my life was gonna completely change, but it did every single time.
I think anyone can understand how blown out they are when they like fully clear a word. Well, imagine fully clearing the axioms.
After having listened to, the lectures, thought, emotion, and effort, all of a sudden I realized, wait a second, those emotions I'm feeling are emanating off of someone else. That thought I just had came from that guy over there.
How you use the cervix facsimile to like make people sympathize with you and like really make, oh, poor you, whatever. No, it's just your surfax.
There's one point in his lecture where he's like, I bet you some of you are looking at yourself wondering and seeing different life continuums, and I'm like, huh. Oh, God, yeah, you're right. Oh, man.
You can't help but see what's going on in the environment and seeing the molecules and seeing the wavelengths and seeing how people operate with each other. It's almost like even communication. You see the wavelength of communication. You go out and you're like, wow, look.
I've always understood the comm formula, but I didn't understand until now how to use communication to as-is any trap that I've ever been in.
And it got to the point where I was like, I literally was saying to myself, please stop having cognitions. I need to go to sleep.
The results that the basics have had on me and my processing are absolutely life-changing. Just, it's a whole different thing now.
It was like he was talking directly at me. He said, Richard, I know you had this experience, and this is what it was all about.
And then you start putting it together with what you studied on the basics. That's a...
The auditing goes like this, like super fast.
Release after release. Just blowing things right out, just lining up my ducks and just knocking them down. It was like unreal.
I ran the engram change twice as fast. I went twice as deep. And then 24 hours later, I went clear.
I can say for the first time is that a perfect product.
È come se LRH stesse parlando con me in italiano.
Bra auf Deutsch mit mir sprechen.
Känns det nästan som det kommer direkt från LRH från svenska.
En español, en francés, en nélas magyarul, de ruszki música.
Brit, mi hangod el?
A nyelvi akadályok most már egyáltalán nem kifogás.
It goes geometrically. 2, 4, 8, 16. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
You're way at the top of the tone scale. You're out of the mechanics of the physical universe.
I feel like if you shot a bullet off, how excited I am is I'm running alongside the bullet, jumping around in and out of it, going, let's go.
An amazing, unbelievable, out-of-this-world rocket ride.
At full throttle.
They're you, they're me.
They're just life-changing.
The basics, they got my back.
It's like vitamin B, rock solid.
The bomb diggity.
The adventure has really begun. And it changes you, and it rocks your world, and it actually transforms you.
Like you don't have a live body without breathing. You can't have an alive Phaeton without the basics.
People are going to look back on the release of the basics as being the beginning of the beginning.
And with that, let's now move on to our annual review of the various sectors in which we work to build a world that's indeed founded on basic Scientology truths. Although, of course, it goes without saying that requisite to such a world is an absence of illiteracy, criminality, and drug abuse, which keep people from even recognizing basic truth. And which in turn, of course, is what the Association for Better Living and Education brings to the banquet table planet-wide. In the aftermath of the wake-up call, we established new international emanation points for Narconon, applied scholastics, and the way to happiness. And as you're about to see when the pictures roll off the screen, It's now regenerating exponentially and everywhere. So to tell you about their most expansive year in history, please welcome the president of Able International, Ms. Rena Weinberg.
Very much. As of this evening, Able International operates in 143 nations and brings frontline LRH technologies to some of the most volatile areas on Earth. Accordingly, Able programs are explicitly engineered to hit core pockets of planetary charge and address those factors that can throw whole societies into states of mass turmoil. In that regard, the story of Able 2007 is a case study on how you keep a civilization intact while preparing populations for clearing. And it all begins at our worldwide drug abuse salvage and training center, Narconon Arrowhead in Oklahoma. It presently helms a network of 177 affiliate groups and centers with in-training rehab specialists from as far afield as Sweden, Jordan, and Thailand. They're also training a lot of rehab specialists from outside the Narconon network, which is to say, and this is a first, the Arrowhead lineup is now fully accredited and so satisfies state requirements for the continuing education of any previously licensed drug counselor. And consequent to that, certified counselors from all over the American rehab community are currently moving through an LRH Tech lineup at Arrowhead. In fact, they're reaching all across Oklahoma, such as Eastern State University, where a Narconon rehab curriculum is now in place for tomorrow's drug counselors. But for the long and short of the Arrowhead story, as of this New Year's 2008, it's not just LRH Tech now embedded in 4 Oklahoma centers, it's state-authorized rehab centers from New Jersey to West Virginia and Texas to Georgia. And that's how in 2007, Narconon Arrowhead became the #1 drug rehab training site for the whole United States. But no matter our home turf in America, it's the far-ranging story that most characterizes Narconon action through 2007, and especially as played out in what drug enforcement people call narco-political zones, meaning places where drug addiction tends to fuse with insurrection and/or terrorism, and most particularly places like these. The first lies just outside Cairo in the Arab Republic of Egypt. It's a primary transit point for Taliban-controlled poppy fields. And Egyptian enforcement will tell you there's a lot of interplay between dealers and Islamic radicals. And since cops can't be bothered with small-time users, addiction rates are staggering, better than 5% of a 16 million population base. But as premiered last year and now newly opened, here's Narconon Egypt. It's already earned 2 spreads in national magazines for the fact graduates, Stay Clean. That may not be news to you, but in a system where 90% of all rehab cases revert, our center's now the #1 referral site for both psychs and medicos, and is now on the project list of North Africa's UN Office on Drugs and Crime to export the tech across the Middle East. Then there's Narconon Colombia. It stands just 10 miles outside of Bogota, which still pipelines close to 60% of the world's cocaine. So in addition to one-on-one salvage, our Colombian team just tagged with the National Drug Control Office, and they're bringing Narconon drug ed lectures to better than 60,000 kids. Finally, and just in case anyone thinks we're not playing for keeps, there's what we've just laid directly on the main narco-terrorist linchpin, our new Narconon, Iran. It stands just a stone's throw from Tehran and even closer to the Afghan opium trade route. It was opened with blessings from the Ministry of Welfare and the Office of the Iranian President. As traditional Iranian rehab has never cracked a single habit, the first dozen completions were something of a miracle. Accordingly, no less than Iran's Minister of Education presented certs to graduates, while the local police chief literally embraced former addicts he'd previously arrested. And it was all followed by letters of appreciation from the regional mayor and governor general, each in the name of Allah, no less, to commemorate what they described as the historic arrival of LRH rehab tech in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And yes, that's Narconon, salvaging the hottest narco-political regions on earth as of this New Year's 2008. However, another word that's due on the State of Narconon 2007, and it follows from the fact that what allows us to enter forbidden ground in Islam makes for very fertile soil everywhere else. Because when you've got a success rate consistently running 80 times better than anything else in the field, you don't have to pray for new Narconons. They multiply all unto themselves. And here's how we're peopling this world with drug-free lives. Narconon Northern California stands just up from Santa Cruz. Their public base is mostly young, primarily kids with party drug problems. But now that we've salvaged better than 800 worst cases from local high schools, cops report an 82% drop in drug-related crime. Then there's Narconon Gold Coast. The habits are a sticky mix of Mexican heroin. But be that as it may, our Gold Coast team now cracks some 60 hardcore cases a year. There's more again out west, where Narconon Nevada's Rainbow Canyon Recovery Unit now cleans up drug casualties from the high-end Vegas resorts. While out on the coast, it's Narconon Newport, and they just cracked their 1,500th hardcore habit from Southern California college towns. There's still more down south. Last year saw our inauguration of a New Life retreat in Baton Rouge, while this year they linked with county hospitals and Louisiana's Office of Addictive Disorders. Our twin centers of Stonehawk, Michigan currently save a life every single day. They also steer clear more than 400 from drugs every week through lectures now sponsored by Walmart. The story repeats beyond America's borders, because Mexico's Narconon Querétaro likewise breaks heavy habits and stops usage before it starts. And that's how they've saved or salvaged over 7,000 lives. There's more yet again to the north. Narconon Three Rivers, Canada now serves all Quebec. And between salvage and prevention, they've saved upwards of 2,000 lives. Doing the same down under is Narconon Melbourne. They now salvage lives all over in Southeast Asia, from Bali and Jakarta to the Philippines and Singapore. And their trainees are now opening new Narconons as far away as Nepal. There's two more in Africa, first in Johannesburg and most recently in Cape Town. And together, they've steered more than 35,000 kids from usage. Then there's our European network, which now extends from Siberia to the Mediterranean. Prominent among them is the Commonwealth of Independent States, who discovered Afghan heroin in the 80s and methamphetamines in the 90s, and those are the chemical profiles of what our Russian centers crack. They now do it in Moscow, Samara, and Dimitrograd. This year they reached over 100,000 people. Moving further west, Scandinavia's got problems with sleep aids and painkillers, but they've also got Narconon Denmark and Sweden. And with state funding, they now save still thousands more. Then again, there's our Zutphen Center in Holland, and they're reaching further into the schools to handle a party drug epidemic. Then, between the Northern Alps and Southern Boot, Italy now boasts 7 full rehab centers, which all told have salvaged or prevented some 250,000 drug casualties. While for everyone I haven't mentioned, including newly opened centers in Kiev, Alberta, and just beyond the LA Basin in Palm Desert, this is the face of Narconon since 9/11 and the establishment of our international foothold. It's new Narconons in 43 countries, with double the number of Narconon groups and centers providing rehabilitation, and more than triple the number of those reached with Narconon drug prevention, and that's our Narconon network as of this New Year's 2008. The next principal layer of charge on the planetary case is criminality. Notwithstanding a worldwide prison population that's fast approaching 10 million, international crime rates continue doubling every couple of decades. But that's where LRH criminal reform technology factors into the equation. And here's how Criminon International rolls it out. Within worldwide criminal justice circles, there are now three kinds of allegedly impossible cases. The first is a genocide scenario, where participants of mass murder are to be reformed and returned to society. And the case in point is Rwanda. To date, about 140,000 combatants in the 1994 slaughter of Tutsi villagers are still in Kigali prisons. They're scheduled for release in a staggered fashion, 8,000 or so at a time. But as previously freed inmates have already proved themselves both unrepentant and unreformed, Rwanda Internal Security hired Criminon. Initial delivery commenced last April with 200 participants of the 94 killings. While as for results, and by direct order from the National Security Minister, Criminon courses will now roll out in all 19 Rwandan war prisons in 2008. The second impossible case scenario returns us to Islam, specifically Pakistan. It now holds about 90,000 inmates in maximum security, at least a third of them linked to Taliban supply systems. But by targeting the most extreme cases with LRH reform technology, Karachi Inspector General of Prisons, Mohammed Yamin Khan, now believes he can make a difference. And here's why. Beginning last March, a Criminon four-step program was delivered to 24 cell block leaders at the Karachi Central Prison. Of the first graduates, not a single test case renewed Taliban ties, and the most prominent among them is now a Criminon supervisor. Moreover, such was word of mouth that course rooms are now regularly running to capacity, and graduations are attended by ministerial representatives. Even more to the point, we come to this. When they see results, they inevitably want more. And that's why Karachi's Inspector General has just green-lighted a full Criminon rollout in all 3 maximum security facilities for 2008. The final impossible scenario literally takes us home, for the fact it concerns LA youth gangs, in particular the most notorious of them all, the original 76th Street Crips. They cumulatively number about 30,000 and typically commit some 400 annual homicides. But beginning just last year, Criminon LA linked with a youth gang intervention group called Ceasefire. They in turn connected with an umbrella organization known as Unity 2. And here's what we did with this impossible case scenario. Because with Criminon tools now in the hands of interventionists, including third-party tech, PDSSP tech, and the way to happiness, we're not talking minor fluctuations. No, and it's absolutely unprecedented. LA gang killings are now down more than 30% across the basin, and that's frontline Criminon action on our home turf as of New Year's 2008. however, one final set of numbers to complete the annual Criminon profile, and the math is as follows. First, there's our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. After weighing Criminon delivery costs against savings from early parole, the District of Columbia's Offender Supervision Agency just authorized another 22 Criminon soups on the federal payroll. Then there's Orange County. What began just last year with a few guys in solitary has now spread to 5 facilities with 17 soups from the County Correctional Authority. And finally, there's Rhode Island's John J. Moran Medium Security Facility, with an inmate-supervised Criminon rollout to 275. Result, 116 have either earned parole or transferred to lesser security units owing to exemplary behavior. And that's how Rhode Island now proudly saves $3.9 million a year with what wardens describe as their Model Criminon Education Department. The figures are no less impressive elsewhere around the world. Criminon Thailand now runs through 4 penitentiaries and a juvenile center, but they've also got more than 80 soups in training for a 50-facility rollout in 2008. Taiwanese criminal organizations boast a 400-year history and are supposedly among the most disciplined gangs on earth. But likewise, just this year, the first Criminon program is now up and running for incarcerated mobsters at Hualien. There's more again in Indonesia, because with recidivism down to less than 2% wherever Criminon works, 33% of all our graduates now qualify for early release. You've seen Colombia from an Arcanan perspective, but here it is again a la Criminon. And for the record, those are former cocaine cowboys moving through a program that's sponsored by the Bogota Coffee Growers Association. Panama's First Lady Vivian Fernandez de Torrijos launched a women's prison program last May. Initial results inspired the largest federal grant in Criminon history. There's still more across the Commonwealth of Independent States. Criminon Novosibirsk now runs juvenile delinquency programs in tandem with districts and ministers, while a world away in Ethiopia, it's a mirror image program to some 50 youth counselors from the Addis Ababa Juvenile Center. And if only to round things out, there's our famed Leercorps program in South Africa. Because that's where the 1,500 capacity prison is now half empty, owing to the fact a full 700 completions were paroled for exemplary conduct. And for the bottom line figure to sum up Criminon tonight, double the number of nations where programs now roll out since the wake-up call, double again the number of prisons where LRH criminal reform tech is at work, and triple the total of those who've been rehabilitated and now found their self-respect. And that's how we're making a world without crime through Criminon International as of this New Year's 2008. ABLE program follows from the simple fact that people who cannot study cannot live. In that respect, illiteracy derails the whole freight train and otherwise makes for what can only be described as cultural oblivion. But of course, that's where applied scholastic slots into our curriculum for world clearing. And as the first word on their year-end report card, it's the classic example of how expansion is exponential when you put the tech in the right hands. That's our international training campus at Spanish Lake. Their purpose is to train top educators and teachers, those responsible for teaching others. And last year saw 225 such educators from classrooms across Canada, Germany, Ghana, Kenya, France, Italy, Mexico, South Africa, Thailand, and all over the USA. They in turn then returned to their institutions and passed the tech on to 898 colleagues, who dutifully passed it on to still another 5,291 educators. And when you take it all the way to the end of the blackboard, across primary, secondary, and college classrooms, there's your geometric progression from Spanish Lake, which placed LRH Study Tech in the hands of no less than 200,000 students through the last year alone. to truly appreciate what those numbers mean to a student population, you've got to follow the lesson plan into places like Nigeria. It's the dark model of what happens when illiteracy rates hit 50%, and you don't have people who can fix a broken water main or build new roads. In contrast, however, our Greater Nigerian Education Project just entered its second phase of delivery, and study tech specialists from Lagos are now on the education circuit through 10 outlying institutions. To maximize scholastic gains, they primarily focus on teacher training facilities, places like the Federal College of Education in Pangshin, where grade school educators are grounded in study tech, word clearing, and communication skills. Net result, from the first 600 professors armed with applied scholastics teaching tools come 5,000 classroom instructors, who in turn passed on study tech to 700,000 students. And as for what that meant in terms of results, a 37% hike in comprehension, a 48% rise in classroom attendance, until, in just 2 years, Nigerian literacy skills are now on par with any nation on earth, and that's applied scholastics changing the face of Africa as we ring in 2008. There is, however, the final tally of applied scholastics. It follows from the fact that close to 1 billion people still can't read word one, which leaves only one solution: bring on study tech everywhere. And the rollout is as follows. There are sections of Central Colombia where illiteracy is almost total, but that's also where we're running study tech programs to coalitions of parents and teachers, upwards of 1,800 at a time. Kazakhstan's got a 33% high school failure rate, and barely 1 in 50 is computer literate. But on behalf of their Ministry of Education, we're now training 167 educators who shape the national curriculums. There's a lot more across Southern Africa. Our continuing study tech program in Zimbabwe now spans 11 districts through 826 schools, as delivered by 18,000 teachers. But for the long and short of that one, we've just reached our 1 millionth student. With another 1.5 million South African students likewise in the APS fold, we're now advancing on the extracurricular arena, adult education trade schools, and work readiness programs. There's a lot more in Mexico City, because that's where study tech saturation in the primary schools raised reading levels 11 points above national norms. And should you still want more, then go to Jamaica, Sri Lanka, Israel, Italy, Japan, or Morocco, to cite but a few. Because since we've opened our international training campus at Spanish Lake, we've not only doubled the number of APS groups bringing LRH study tech to 67 nations, and quadrupled the number of educators training semester after semester, but as of tonight, you'll now find LRH Tech at work in 100,000 schoolrooms for the benefit of more than 2 million students worldwide, and that's Applied Scholastics International as of this New Year's 2008. There is, however, one more requisite word on the state of able tonight, and it returns us to the whole working premise of our delivery machine. Namely, make LRH social betterment technology available to those best positioned to employ that tech, then let them run with it to repair their own cultures. That they may or may not be Scientologists is beside the point. They know the local choreography, they know the key contacts, and even more importantly, they wouldn't be reaching for the tech if they weren't intimately familiar with the problem that tech was designed to handle. In that regard, here's a story of what it means to bring everyone on our org board, and so extend LRH Tech for cultural salvage to the literal ends of the earth.
Nepal. It's the birthplace of the Buddha and sacred ground for the last 5,000 years. But wedged between the Golden Triangle and the Golden Crescent, it's also now a free-flowing heroin pipeline. While caught in the backwash are Nepalese addicts, 150,000 and growing. And that's not just bad karma, it's an epidemic. But rescuing addicts and leading the way to a drug-free nation is Narconon Nepal, headed by Basanta Razkoor. As a senior officer with the Kathmandu Police Department, Basanta long witnessed addicts treated as criminals without even a pretense of rehabilitation. Determined to find a better way, he retired from the force and, along with his wife Pusa, opened a drug rehab. They called it Pratigya, meaning commitment. But without any real rehabilitation tech, most wound up back on the streets. Then, Basanta found Narconon.
I was trying to help a drug addict with different methods, but I was not successful. When I came to know about Alan Howard's technology, I thought this is a remedy. By the help of this technology, I can help people. So I started Narconon Nepal.
Basanta immediately dispatched Pusa and another staff member for training and apprenticeship at the nearest Narconon, 6,000 miles away in Melbourne, Australia. Meanwhile, armed only with copies of Narconon's drug education booklets, they began the prevention side of the Narconon equation. With more and more young people strung out on the streets, Basanta's strategy was all about reaching kids in big numbers. And to do just that, he called on his fellow cops to line up schools across their respective districts. And so it rolled out, with Narconon Drug Ed to 300 in the Banglong District School, another 375 at Kathmandu's Y School, and 500 more on the Parasar campus in Dalmali. While to keep the drug-free message coming at their classmates, Basanta also left behind student-run Narconon clubs. And so it was, within the first 12 months, the Narconon Nepal team hit 50 school campuses and community centers, reaching upwards of 150,000 at-risk kids. With their trainees returned and on post, Basanta and crew began delivery of the rehab component of the Narconon program. The original Pratigya building, the one they called the Red House, was reserved for drug-free withdrawal. It was here addicts kicked alcohol, opium, and heroin habits with a regimen of vitamins, assists, and the full battery of therapeutic TRs. Then it was on to the sauna and the purification program, housed in its own building on the Pratigya compound. From there, they moved on to the course rooms in the White House, where those who once shot up in the Tamil district now made their way through ups and downs in life. While for those who had ransacked apartments in Pokhara to feed their habits, it was personal values and integrity. And for the dealers who formerly hustled along the Bagmati River, it was tools for a stable future with the changing conditions in life course. That the first graduation was televised to more than 2 million was testament to the fact that Nepal had never seen recovery like this. The ceremony even concluded with a formal Nepalese prayer that the grads remain drug-free. More than that, here was the beginning of even greater rehabilitation, as many of those grads signed on as Narconon Nepal staff. Some becoming intake counselors, manning the Narconon hotline, fielding calls from mothers and others with family and friends who were hooked. Still more forming the 30-person complement of drug education specialists, now rolling out in the Narconon Nepal fleet. And finally, to meet the demand, with Basanta next acquiring the Yellow House, thereby boosting Narconon Nepal delivery power to 100 students at a time.
When the first student was graduated, I was really excited by the success. We had gotten very good results so far, but I wanted to take it to the next level to reach the whole country.
So, to pull the pin on national implementation, Basanta began by bringing the tech to the front lines of the Nepalese drug war. The cops and soldiers who had no idea why anyone got hooked in the first place. He started with 300 cadets at the police academy in the Maharajganj district of Kathmandu. Then at Garibati Military Academy, it was drug ed to 300 in the Officer Training Corps. And finally, the rank and file at Shivapuri Military Academy, where General Ram Bahadur Gurung himself attended, and thereafter ordered Narcanon's drug ed officially on the curriculum. While to reach all the rest, Basanta embarked on a no-holds-barred media blitz. He hit the airwaves from Radio Nepal to Classic FM, and then Sakamata Radio. In all, more than 300,000 dialed in. While at the same time, it was a parade of articles in the Nepal Samachar Patra and every other major daily, with a total readership upwards of 3 million. But Basanta was just getting warmed up, for he next launched Narcanon's own 30-minute Say No to Drugs television show. Hosted by Nepalese television icon Santosh Panta, it was the Narcanon story, as told by the graduates themselves. And with sponsorship from the landmark Soalti Crown Plaza Hotel in Kathmandu, it was soon airing twice weekly to an audience of more than 6 million. Then, with drug education to 430,000 Nepalese kids, leaving whole campuses categorically drug-free, while district police reported drug-related crime at an all-time low, and not a single new addict on the books, it was next receiving official endorsement from the Deputy Speaker of the Nepalese Parliament, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Home Affairs, with a drug-free future for Nepal now in the hands of Narcanon.
Being as a Member of Parliament, former Minister of Health, I very much acknowledge it, and I think this is the needed program for the country, for the nation also.
Narcanon Nepal is saving life. It is showing the direction, the right direction for prosperous Nepal. It is absolutely saving lives.
I have seen very good results, very good improvements, and even I have seen now the parents who had tears in their eyes have now a smile on their lips.
I would like to give thanks to Mr. Harvard because really he's a father of life. Nowadays, after applying this Narcanon formula, our school is totally free from drugs.
He dedicated all his life for the service of the people and service of those people that those have been discarded from the society. Yeah. In my opinion, he seems to be Messiah.
I assure all of you, one day the South Asia will be benefited by Narcanon Nepal. I assure that, because my life is devoted for this cause.
And that's how one dedicated individual, working under the banner of Narcanon, put in place the means to rescue his people from addiction and started an entire nation on the path to a drug-free future.